Kan du sige, far, kan du sige rollemodellerne?
Rollemodellerne?
Rollemodellerne.
Mit navn er Bjørn Vestergaard, og det her, det er min søn Valdemar. Hvad han ikke ved er, at jeg over 55 afsnit har skabt rollemodellerne som en gave til ham, så han kan sætte sit eget aftryk i verden, når han bliver stor. For rollemodellerne er et kartotek af mennesker, som har tur gå mod strømmen, gå efter drømmen. En skildring af dem, der har haft mod til at kunne og viljen til at ville. Selv har jeg lært uendelig meget af mine samtaler undervejs, uanset om gæsten var Jakob Risgaard, Martin Thorborg eller Claus Meyer. Og jeg håber, at du, kære lytter, også har. Jeg håber, at du vil læne dig tilbage og lade dig blive forbløffet, berørt og måske vigtigst inspireret. Velkommen til Rollemodellerne, podcasten, hvor du starter med den bedste inspiration.
Ja, det er Bjørn her. Hej med dig, kære lytter, og rigtig hjertelig velkommen til den her specielle episode af Rollemodellerne, som for en gang skyld faktisk foregår på engelsk. Så måske burde jeg faktisk sige, yeah, this is Bjørn speaking. Fordi at dagens gæst, det er en brite. Han er mere end 80 år gammel, så jeg kunne simpelthen ikke lokke ham til at lære dansk. Så sagt med andre ord, this will be in English, mate. Det var en virkelig dårlig engelsk accent, men jeg håber, du forstår, hvor jeg vil hen med det. Som du nok har erfaret, kære lytter, så er det efterhånden meget sjældent, at jeg laver interviews på engelsk. Og den eneste regel, jeg har omkring det, det er, at den eneste det eneste, der skal ske, før at jeg laver et interview på engelsk, det er, at det skal være en helt ekstraordinær gæst, og gæsten kan på ingen mulig måde interviews på dansk. Og det kan jeg roligt sige, at det kriterie falder dagens gæst i den grad under. Fordi hvis man kigger på omfanget af den erhvervssucces, som den her person har skabt, så er han klart den gæst i rollemodellernes historie, som har formået at skabe den største internationale virksomhed og bygget et verdenskendt brand. Han er samtidig en helt fænomenal storyteller, og det gør egentlig kun glæden ved at have ham med i rollemodellerne større. Du kender ham nok ikke af navn, men du kender helt sikkert hans virksomhed. Fordi dagens gæst, det er nemlig Joe Foster, som sammen med sin bror stiftede det ikoniske sportstøjsbrand Reebok. Og de endte faktisk med at gøre Reebok til verdens største sportsbrand. Og det var foran mastodonter som Adidas og Nike, inden virksomheden blev frasolgt af dem til faktisk Adidas tilbage i 90'erne. Joe, han er i dag mere end 80 år gammel, men han er en exceptionel storyteller, og da han for nylig udgav selvbiografien Shoemaker, der valgte jeg at slå til og invitere ham med i rollemodellerne. Shoemaker, skal jeg skynde mig at sige, synes jeg er en helt fantastisk bog, der handler om at være et familiefirma, der er på vej til at synke, forlade det og gå efter sin egen drøm og stifte en virksomhed, der kan slå igennem internationalt og komme til USA, som var den store drøm og ambition for Joe og hans bror. Det lykkedes for dem, og de endte faktisk med at lave Reebok, inden de solgte den, til at have en omsætning på mere end $4 milliarder. Det har været en kæmpemæssig erhvervssucces, så jeg kunne ikke slippe den her bog igen. Og jeg skal skynde mig at sige, at jeg lovede lige Joe at sige, hvis du synes, det her interview var fedt, så vil du elske Shoemaker. Så jeg kan i hvert fald klart anbefale bogen, så jeg synes lige, du skal tjekke den ud, hvis du har mulighed for det. Derudover, jamen, så har jeg som altid lige en hurtig bøn til dig, kære lytter. Som du måske ved, så er rollemodellerne det her mit Connemore-projekt, og det er sådan set kun mig, der driver den her podcast. Der er ikke et stort hold bagved, der er ikke nogen store mastodonter bagved. Der er sådan set kun mig. Så hvis du nu kan lide det her, og det håber jeg, du kan, så vil jeg være dig uendelig taknemmelig, hvis du vil støtte podcasten ved at efterlade en anmeldelse i iTunes, eller hvor du lytter til podcasten, eller endnu bedre måske, del det med dine venner, eller med dem, du tror kan få glæde af det på sociale medier. Det vil gøre mig en kæmpe tjeneste. Så er der også flere, der kan få glæde af podcasten, og du støtter rollemodellerne. Så hvis du har lyst til at gøre mig den tjeneste, så vil jeg bare sige tusind tak. Det var ordene for mig. Rigtig hjertelig velkommen til, kære lytter, og god fornøjelse med rollemodellerne. Det her, det er et specielt afsnit. Gæsten er Joe Foster, som har stiftet sportstøjsvirksomheden Reebok. Rigtig god fornøjelse med podcasten.
And congratulations on your new book as well, Shoemaker, which we will be talking about a bit later, I think.
Yes, I mean, You started off by saying that people don't know my name. That wasn't the intention, of course. The intention was Reebok, and always was Reebok. So that's right. And it's only since I decided to write the book, because a lot of people decided how Reebok started, and there were so many versions, and they were all wrong. But I thought, we'd better write the book, and then people have the story. So that's how my name now comes out, because I wrote the book, but the story is about Reebok.
Yeah, but I will say, and I can say this for sure, this is an amazing book. I really, really enjoyed it so much. Thank you so much for writing it, Joe. It's wow. I would call it a page turner. I have had a very difficult time letting it go. To my wife's kind of annoyance, I would guess. But
you're very kind. Thank you.
Joe, actually, before we kind of jump into talking about the Reebok story, talking about your life as well, one thing that kind of dawned to me a bit while reading the book, and what I'm kind of curious about as well, because it's just, I mean, I can say this with the uttermost respect. You are the most experienced person I ever had on this podcast. And I find it really amazing, the level of detail you have in the book about the whole life and endeavors of you and Reebok. Can you talk me and the listeners a bit about like the process of actually selecting? Like, I mean, you have had Reebok for so many years, and there have been so many pivotal moments I could imagine. The process of actually sitting now, like so much later, and kind of going into what's the core of what actually made the company.
Yeah, it's well, I mean, the story itself, as you know, the family have been involved since 1895, since my grandfather made his first pair of running spikes. And he's credited with either inventing or pioneering running shoes and sports footwear, including training shoes. So born into, we'll say the sports footwear business, I think, and we went through, Jeff and myself, we set Reebok up as a company, but we also worked for our family business, which was J.W. Foster and Sons. And J.W. Foster and Sons had made boots and shoes for almost every football team you could think in England. So they were very famous. They had a lot of gold medals. They made the shoes for three very important men, Eric Liddell, Harold Abrahams, and Lord Burleigh, and they were immortalised in the film Chariots of Fire. So I come from a big history, a long history of sports good or sports shoe manufacturers. So being involved in it, it was sort of almost natural. Our problem was that the J.W. Foster Company, when my grandfather died in 1933, I was born in 1935. I happened to be born on his birthday, which my grandmother said, he's brought his name with him. So my grandfather was Joe, I am Joe. And the company was taken over then by his sons, my father and my uncle. They ran the company. Jeff and myself joined the company. Then we went off for 2 years to do national service. Everybody had to do it. So we did national service. And we came back to a company that was failing. So what grandfather started, father and uncle just hadn't continued. In fact, they were at war with each other. They were a bit like Adi Dassler and Rudy Dassler. They couldn't work together, but they did. They continued working together. But the company was failing. So the first pivotal moment, as far as Jeff and I were concerned, was the fact that this company is failing. And we tried to get my father to change and do things. He wouldn't. All he could say is, look, when your uncle's gone and I'm gone, this will be your company and you can do what you like. And all we could say back to my father was, look, we don't want you to go. That's not the plan, but this company will be gone. It took us a couple of years before we decided we couldn't do anything there. So we had to leave the family business and set up our own company, Mercury Sports Footwear. Now, I think that was the first big decision. more or less forced onto us, really. We didn't have much choice. We could have stayed with the family business, but it was going down. And if you have a little bit of ambition, a little bit of imagination, you know that you have to take that step. So that was probably the most pivotal time.
That's a really, really interesting insight as well. And actually, I dwelled a bit upon that when I read the book. Can we talk about that for a second, Joe? Because one of the things I actually were a bit curious about. I mean, there are so many really interesting ways and routes to go from here. But one of the things that I actually thought a little bit about, you wrote, was actually your dad's kind of mindset towards owning and running a business, right? Because, and this is the way I kind of interpret it, and if it's wrong, then please correct it. But the way I kind of understood it was that he saw running the shoe company and his own business as kind of a means to an end, right? So that he didn't have the same ambitions as for that company as were kind of born within the whole Reebok, or with the whole Reebok spirit when you and your brother Jeff started Reebok. Is that kind of the way to understand that? And can you talk about like how that kind of affected your outlook on business and on ambitions?
I think you're somewhat right, though. It's a question that nobody's really asked me before, but I think what it is that I had about 6 years between my uncle and father in age, and whether that was one of the reasons that they never got on together, I don't know. I don't really know what the reason was, but I can only think that my father was born in 1906, and I think his brother was born in 1901. But they went through 2 world wars. World War I stopped running shoe manufacturing, and they started repairing army boots. World War II was the same. So at the end of World War II, we're thinking they're in the late 40s, maybe early 50s, and whether they hadn't the spirit to sort of think this is a business rather than an existence, rather than something that they just make shoes so it provides them with a living, and that is it. Whereas grandfather, when he started his business, he started it with that spirit, that challenge, with that imagination. And I've thought about it, whether those 2 world wars killed off their imagination and their ability to turn off and take a different fight, a fight with a business to make it grow, to turn it into something. Jeff and myself, of course, we were only youngsters in World War II. I was only 10 when it ended. And, no matter what goes on in your life, probably the first 10 years, you probably think, well, that's normal. Yeah, we have a world war, so what? Yeah, you're too young to realize what that means. So when you come out of it, all of a sudden lights come on again. You can see things, right? Oh, it's different, and you accept it though because you're so young. So, but when it came to doing 2 years of national service, we went away from the company, and we saw a different side to the world. You had to look after yourself. You join the armed forces, and yes, you're disciplined. Very much disciplined, but you have to look after yourself. And I think that gave Jeff and myself that thought, well, we can do it. We're young. What can happen? No, we can do better than this. We're indestructible. I'm 23, Jeff is 25. So what? It's let's get on with it. And so I think then when we did that, it made us think of business. It made us think of how do we grow? How do we get bigger? By the time Jeff and I set off with Mercury, which we changed the name in about 18 months, and you know the story, we can go through that. But when we set off, it was an adventure. Suddenly, we've got to think about how do we sell the shoes? How do we expand the business? The football business had been lost to Adidas. Adidas had taken that, and it would have been too expensive for us to go into football. So we stayed with what we knew, which was running, and how to grow the running business. That was the challenge.
Yeah. And that's actually pretty interesting, Joe. For the listeners who probably not aware of this, but your grandfather's company at that time in the early 90s had like all the major Premier League clubs. Right? It wasn't called Premier League back then, I guess, but they still had like Manchester City, Arsenal, United, and so on and so forth. I mean,
yes.
But it also kind of goes to show that you can have a very dominant position at one point, but if you're not evolving and if you're not keeping up with what's happening in the market, which I guess they didn't, then at some point you will also lose that market, I guess.
Well, that's exactly it. I don't know how they lost the market. I don't know why they lost the market. Certainly, if we look back to the first half of the 20th century, we don't have the same sort of... the business is different. Now we're a fashion business. Sport is fashion. Sport has gone to street. Excuse me. In my grandfather's day, he was an influencer. He knew how to. He gave his shoes to people like Hal Shrub, who broke 3 world records in one meeting, and he gave his shoes to these athletes who were in Chariots of Fire. So he knew what influencing was, but he was influencing other athletes, and so that was the sort of the size of the company. Could be how many people would wear a pair of shoes for performance. Now, everything has gone street. So the performance side of your business may be 10, 20% at the best. The rest is fashion. The rest is on the street. So today it's a different type of business. And you have to grow and move with the business. And I say my father and uncle, they could have, I suppose, kept up with the business my grandfather had, but just after World War II, even to when we left the business in the 50s, Adidas had come in, but they weren't looking at that. They weren't looking at the business. So they just kept making the same shoes. They didn't even have sales representatives. It was amazing. And I was trying to change them to do that, to see a business. So we know, even today, from when Jeff and I started, the business itself has changed tremendously. Influencing now is so important. And whilst performance is still the most important part of influencing, the big sales come from other influence. Kanye West for Adidas, and this goes on now. Entertainers are influencers.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's really an interesting outlook, I would say, also because the sporting goods industry has changed so much. As you said, it really, really evolved from being just like people who are actually doing sports to being more of a fashion statement as well, and being in that kind of business. One thing I actually reflected a bit upon, Joe, when researching for this interview was, I think, because not kind of going forward in history, we might get back to that, we might not, but you exited Reebok at one point and has since then, among other things, been writing this book, the Shoemaker book as well. Do you still have what would you call it? In Danish, you probably say something like tickle, but do you still have cravings for being in business and kind of, being in that game and, creating something that's influencing people through your work? You did that now with the book, but from the time you exited Reebok, I know, as far as I understand, they also kind of, they ask you for help quite a bit throughout the years afterwards that you exited the business. But how is it kind of at this point in your life, Joe, where, it's been a while since you've been in the Reebok business, doing day-to-day operations and such. How is that like now? Do you miss that part of the journey, or how's life like that in that sense?
Well, Bjorn, I think that you learn lessons as you go through life. And I left the Reebok business in the end of 1989. Also, at that time, the control of the business we'd taken to America, and America as far as I'm concerned, America, that's where we needed to drive the business. It's where athletics and running really grew. And we were there at the right time for growing. But you get to a point where you recognize the fact that, for 20 years or more, getting that business off the ground, seeking the opportunities. And once I was able to get into America, we designed the Aztec shoe, which got 5-star ratings from Runner's World magazine. And that was the entry. I tried for 10 years, 11 years to get into America because that was the bigger market. So for me, it was, okay, I've achieved this. Then I continued then to work on distribution globally. But the energy behind the brand had to come from the American market and people in America. So it was essential that other people feel the ownership. They've got to take on board that winning culture and grow that winning culture. So you get to a point, and as you can imagine, when a company is going to $1 billion and into $4 billion, one person can't run that company. That could be a lot of people. So the energy has to be behind encouraging people. And I'd love you to be part of Reebok. Come on, what can we do? And then they also create and have an imagination. And so the creativity is with a lot of people, but they all have to be having that same feeling. This is what we want. And Reebok was very successful at that. Not only did we get the running shoes into America, but also a guy called Angel Martinez. He stumbled into aerobics because his wife was doing it. And he saw them. Well, why don't we make a special shoe? Those are special people. And as you've read the book, I mentioned gatekeepers. Gatekeepers are people who can really open something extra. And Paul Feynman was that when I got to America. They didn't want somebody from England to run a company in America. That doesn't work. You need an American. You need to get their culture within your culture and build. So there are layers and times. And when you say, do I feel that I still want the day-to-day? No. It's better to stand back and use that experience. But we did this, we did that. But also, the Eagles and the Eagles song, Hotel California. Well, it's a bit like that for me. Yeah, you can check out, but you can never leave. And so that was it. So I am stuck with Reebok because it's the drug. We started it, we built it, and I still think it's the best brand in the world. And who knows? Adidas are now selling the brand. And I'm talking to people who seem to be interested. So, where do we go from here? It could just be the beginning of another story. So that's my life with Reebok. And yes, I know it from beginning, and I'm still here.
And it's an amazing achievement also, Joe. I mean, Reebok has been around for so long. I mean, you see, especially in some of the more, since it has become more of a fashion thing, the sporting goods business at this point. You also see a lot of companies closing faster, right? But it's really an amazing achievement that Reebok has stood this test of time and has been around since the 50s, where you made the company, right?
Right. Yes.
Joe, there are so many questions I want to ask you. I hardly know where to begin, but you said something very interesting about the culture and the energy of the organization, right? So obviously, once you're taking so just to kind of take your listeners, you actually started doing making the shoes back home in your factory in Bury, right?
Yes.
And going from there to where you are that you are actually building a large organization, trying to gain momentum, gain energy, unleash the creativity within the company. Do you have any thoughts and reflections or anything you kind of thought that you did very well with Reebok on actually getting people to be creative and creating an environment where they could unleash their energy and unleash their creativity?
Well, I think what is important is to realize that you need people. You need a lot of people. You need to be a leader is also to be able to stand back and listen, and to be able to encourage people to do things. And it's employing the right people. This is so important in growing. And it's you could probably learn it, but I think mainly it's the fact that if you can talk to people and you can listen to people, you find that you sort of grow that. I can say it's like an ability to have people come in and enjoy what they're doing. Because if you don't enjoy what you're doing, that's you're never going to succeed. So it has to be something that you really love to do. You get up in the morning and you want to get to work. You want to get to that place. It's not work. You want to get back into the culture, back into Reebok, back with those people who are sharing that desire. So I think it's so important to build your team and give people controls, give people the freedom to do things. And it was always for me. It was when you put somebody in a good position and say, look, you may have problems, but don't bring those problems to me. Bring me answers. And if if your answer, you've got a problem with having too many answers, we can sort out the answers. But they're your problems. You've got to pick up on this. And I think as you develop and you look around and you see what is the next. We were very lucky. You make your own luck, but we went to America. It took me 11 years to get into America, and I had at least 6 failed attempts with good people. But what was it was trying to push. When I went to the exhibitions and people would say, "Okay, where do I buy your shoes?" Well, in England, it was like, well, there's that New England. They were thinking the shoes were already there in America. No, it's how to get that into America. The money, it takes funding. How do you get the funding? Well, you get the funding if there's a demand. You go to somebody and you say, well, I'd like a lot of money because I'd like to do this. Well, but how can you put your money in unless there's a demand? So things. It all depends on timing. And we were very lucky. Running became something very big in America during the 70s. And late 60s and 70s. That's the time when we were trying to get in. But when we got 5 stars, it changed things, because a 5-star running shoe in America, that was then the demand. So they wanted the product. And that way we could actually get the product in. Funding, that came by way of Stephen Rubin. Paul Feynman was my man in America. He was my gatekeeper. And Arno Martinez was the other gatekeeper that introduced us to aerobics. So a lot of people in America didn't know we were a really top athletic company. No, we became a woman's company. And you've got to move with this. So whilst it was great, no, we can't become aerobics. We've got to stay with athletics and running. No, you've got to go with as you see the business. And so Reebok grew, and it grew from 9 million to 30 million, to 90 million, then 300 million, then 900 million in successive years. So we were not planning that. Nobody was there saying, well, how do we move? What's our next move? Where do we? No, it's your biggest problem. And even then, the biggest problem wasn't funding, because we had tremendous cash flow and turnover. The biggest problem, where do you get the product? Keeping up with demand was a fantastic problem, really. And we got lucky because Nike, in fact, had a slowdown. They had a problem, and they came out of 2 or 3 factories in Korea just when Reebok wanted it. So, yeah, the luck was there. One luck was the fact that we were in running when running exploded. And number 2, we were right at the beginning of aerobics and really made aerobics Reebok. And Reebok became a woman's company.
Yeah. And that's really, really interesting, Joe. And I think there's so many lessons to be learned. And actually, let's talk a bit about that, because, I mean, oftentimes, actually, what I see, like, in very successful companies, they have a tendency that they're actually able to turn their disadvantages to advantages, right? So, I mean, exactly from the Reebok perspective, what I really, really enjoyed about your story, as well as you also tell it here, is the fact that you were actually using that you were, to some extent, not very well known in the States at that point, to your advantage, since you could actually kind of take your brand in a totally another direction. And everybody know that the likes of Nike and some of the other competitors were very masculine, very sweaty kind of brands, where it was all about the masculine energy, and you didn't kind of have that. Can we talk about that? I mean, how did you use that disadvantage in some people's eyes to actually lift and elevate Reebok to another level?
Well, it's quite funny, really, because we've been on the market in running, so we were known by people who were runners, and at that time, we weren't a fashion company. It wasn't too much street. It was the fact that a lot of people wanted to keep fit, so we had a good business in running. And Angel, down in California, and his wife coming home after doing these aerobic classes, and Angel is saying, "What are you doing?" "Oh, we're exercising to music." So he went down to have a look at this. And what did he see? He saw the instructor in trainers and half the class in trainers, the rest in bare feet. Saw an opportunity. Went up to Boston to see Paul Feynman and said, Paul, there's new things going on. And Paul said, whoa, no. Yeah, we're in running. We're a running company, and we're doing very nicely at running. Forget it, Arnold. Arnold didn't, though. Arnold went round to the back door, and he had a word with production, Steve Liggett. And he said, "Steve, make me 200 pairs, just white, nice, with the Reebok on there and a little Union Jack. Just give me that colour. Make it in glove leather and on a woman's last." Oh, right. He was very persuasive, and Steve got him his 200 pairs. And he got them down in Los Angeles and San. And that was it, because these girls loved the shoes so much. They didn't just wear them for aerobics. They started walking on the streets. They went to work in them. They loved them. They became street. And of course, being down in Los Angeles, it wasn't long before Hollywood. Jane Fonda is wearing them in her workout videos. And of course, like you said, Sigourney Weaver and others started. Sybil Shepherd went to pick up her Emmy Award, I think it was, in orange high tops. And when they asked her, "Well, what are you wearing these?" They're so comfortable. So this and okay. So we then the demand came in, and like you said, Adidas, Puma, and Nike, male, sweaty. Yeah, people didn't know Reebok that much, so we became that beautiful, nice ladies' shoe, and it exploded the company. So it's wherever your luck is. Sometimes these opportunities. Okay, Arnold went up to see Paul Feynman, and Paul's initial reaction was, "No, we don't." But as soon as things started to move, Paul was on it as well. That's great, and it was then that how do you manage to finance it? And then the bigger problem, as I've said, was where do you get the production? How do you go from a $300 million company to a $900 million company within a year? How do you do that? That takes an awful lot. It really does.
I could imagine, Joe, for sure. One question I also actually thought was very interesting about this entire journey of yours. And jumping back a bit, also obviously because this is about your personal lessons as well. One of the things that I took notice from the book, and one of the things that I actually also thought it could be interesting to talk a bit about, is the whole time that. So there are two perspectives that you guys did military service afterwards, which actually kind of where you kind of saw, as we discussed earlier on, kind of saw that there's another way, that you kind of have to expand your worldview a bit, maybe from your dad and the way him and your uncle have been running the business so far. Can we talk about the whole, like, I think you're in the book kind of right, like the whole self-discipline aspect of it. The way I kind of at least understood it was that you kind of, that was, I mean, the whole taking responsibility, having self-discipline was one of the key insights you actually learned during your time in the army. Is that correctly understood? And how did that did you apply that, if so, to your work with the Reebok and building Reebok?
Well, I think discipline was very important. During the war, Jeff and I were quite young, and just after the war, we were part of the scouting movement as well, and we had a very disciplined scoutmaster. We really did do the camping and build things. So that was a good discipline to begin with, and so it made us self-sufficient. Yes, we could look after ourselves, but then 2 years in the forces, I was in the RAF, Jeff was in the army. Jeff went to Germany. And in Germany, he saw Adidas and he saw Puma. He saw what they were doing. So he had a good idea when he came back, Joe, they're making different shoes. It's, and it's totally different mentality. But by that time, we'd been away, Mother was no longer doing our washing, making the bed and making the meals. We had to look after ourselves. If you didn't get up, if you didn't do something, if you didn't do it, nobody was there to pick it up for you. So I think that's the important lesson, is you have to be responsible. You have to do it. You can't turn around and say, well, can somebody do this? No, you do it. And I think that is the discipline. And it's also the fact that what you learn from being in the armed forces is you learn that you can do it. You learn how to use the system. I used to play badminton to a reasonable level, and for 12 months of my 2 years, I was away from my sort of camp most of the time, but was playing badminton. And then they'll love you. So I said, yeah, well, I can play badminton, so I'll do this. And you find you can work your way into different situations just by taking advantage of what is on offer. And so I think it's that. I think it's seeing the opportunities. I saw one at playing badminton, and yeah, I could play okay. And I played for the Fighter Command. No longer exists Fighter Command now, but I used to play for Fighter Command. And you go all over the country, and it was great. So that discipline that makes you think in a different way, that is something different. It's like when we found out that we couldn't register the name Mercury, we never even thought you registered the name, because Foster's, if it's your name, it doesn't matter. We could have called ourselves J.W. Foster as well, but that wouldn't have been right, would it? The parent company is still there, and then you've got Foster's down the road also. No, we didn't do that. We couldn't register the name. We found out it was pre-registered by somebody else. So we changed the name, and the story which you obviously read about me finding Reebok in a dictionary. I remember that I'm 8 years old, and I win this race because it was during the war, and I go up to collect my prize, and it's a dictionary. I'm 8 years old. Where's the football? Hey, a dictionary. No. But that dictionary in 1960, I'm turning to, I love the letter R, and I'm flipping through, I soon come to R-E-E-B-O-K. Reebok. What's that? A small South African gazelle. Gazelle? Wow, gazelle. That sounds like athletics. So we changed our name. It was fair enough. And we'd only been about 4 years in the business when we got a letter from Adidas. And at that time, our silhouette was 2 stripes and a T-bar. And they thought that 2 stripes and a T-bar infringed their 3 stripes. So they wrote, the solicitors wrote a letter, the lawyers, telling us we must stop using that design. I think for about 5 minutes we were a bit destroyed and said, and then we think, just a minute, Adidas recognise that we're here. You know? Adidas know we're around. They've written they have our address and they've written us a letter. So we just changed our silhouette. As you can see behind me, we changed it to the vector. And that was better. That improved things. So, it's when you get the problem. And it's probably something through discipline and through having to think for yourself that we picked up, both Jeff and I, when we were in the armed forces, is that, yes, there's a way around it. Don't try and go through it. That could be dangerous. That could be costly. Could be difficult. And easier to go around it. And so we did that. So you do learn that discipline. And I think that throughout your life, as far as I was concerned, throughout Reebok, it was the discipline. If somebody's good, let them do it. But no, recognize that they can do it. And you probably hear it these days. If you're the brightest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. That's it. And it was always a matter of employing somebody who could do the job better than you could. So if you get somebody who can do it better, and give it to them.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense, Joe, and some really great insights there. I mean, we have been talking a little bit around the area of people, right? Or the topic of people, at least. And that was actually one of the big lessons I think I took from your book as well. Because at least the way you kind of describe it, right? We have been telling the name Paul Fireman a few times during our conversation already.
Right.
You also talked about, the IP rights with the Mercury Sports, which you couldn't take. So it ended up being Reebok, and that was Derek Waller, right? Which was the lawyer there.
Indeed. Yes.
And in general, and one last name I want to mention as well, and you can tell the story afterwards probably, but is John Willie Johnson, right? Also, like people showing up on crucial times during the Reebok kind of story and just helping you out tremendously. Do you have any reflections or any kind of thoughts on how did you come across these people and how kind of you engaged them with what you were doing with Reebok at that point in time?
Well, what we were doing with Reebok was good, really good. We were breaking ground in quite a few things, and we had very little money. And I met a lot of people, and we talk about John Willie Johnson. It was at the time when the footwear industry really was leaving the UK and going to the Far East. They'd go to the Far East because it was so much cheaper to make. So the industry was shutting down in the UK. And as it shut down, a lot of factories were closing and all the machinery was being auctioned off. Machinery. And I used to go to these, and I met John Willie Johnson. I'd seen him a few times, and I met him at one of them. He was at every one of these sales, and he would be on the front row. And the auctioneer would go look around, get a price, and if nobody wanted, there was an item nobody wanted, he would look down at John Willie, and John Willie just nod. Yes, okay. And after the auction, John Willie would disappear with the auctioneer, and they'd come to some agreement on the prices that obviously were not done at the auction. And I just happened to sit next to him on one of these occasions, and I knew he was from near where we were. It was about 10 miles further into what they call Rossendale Valley, which is the Shoemaker area of Lancashire. And I sat next to him. We chatted, and I happened to say, oh yes, I picked up a lot of leather, but the police stopped me going back because I overloaded. I'd got a hire van and I was overloaded. And John Willie said, oh well, look, He said, why don't we come down together? I said, that sounds all right. I said, I'll come over, I'll drive us down. But he'd seen my car, and we said, no, we'll go in my car. So we went in John with his car. And he said, don't worry about it. If you buy something, I get loads of stuff at these auctions. My men will pick your stuff up and bring it up as well. And, oh, brilliant. That's great. At least that way I wouldn't get picked up again for being overloaded in a small van. So I went up, and that was the next time, and we were going down to the next auction. But I went up to his footwear. Well, he had 3 big mills, and he also had a big mill which was just full of all this stuff that he collected at these auctions. And I said, John, what do you do with all this stuff? And there were stuffed crocodiles, there's big stuffed birds, or anything that you could think. He just bought it, and he had it all in this area. And he said, come along, have a look. So we went into this, and I happened to spot a machine that we wanted. Oh, so we could do with one of the machines like that. Can I buy that one off you, John? And he said, no. Oh, well, can I rent it then? He said, no. Okay, John. He said, you can have it. He said, just give it me back when you finish with it. Yeah. Thank you, John. And not only that, he said, I'll get my men to bring it down. And so his men loaded it on their own transport, brought it down, put it in place in our factory, and wired it up, ready to go. He didn't want anything. So, yeah, and we had a great friendship from there. Any machine that he had that we wanted, it became embarrassing at some time, like, well, look, John, that's a nice machine. But yes, so he was so generous, and that type of person. Derek Shackleton, who really, he was a super salesman. He really was. And he worked for a company that he persuaded me to let them do our distribution. It's a good idea. And yeah, that would increase. But unfortunately, there was a problem. And Derek Shackleton left, went to set up a sports unit for barter. And the company had left, just couldn't stand him going. And they went out of business. And they were our sole distributors. That was a nightmare. But, we got through it. And Shaq also helped because he persuaded Barter that they needed us to make some shoes for them, which we did do. So, and I think it's, if you've got integrity and, you can talk to people and you can trust and you show that you can trust. And I think that grows that bond. We were all in the same business together, and it's that bond. So it's those sort of people. And Paul Feynman, he was different. At the same time in 1979, I had a visit at my stand by Kmart. Kmart in America are big retailers, big nationwide, and they wanted 25,000 pairs. Our factory, that would have been about 6 months' work for our small factory. But we knew if we were getting a 5-star shoe, we knew we needed help. So Shackleton at Barter, they would help. Yes, they could do it. But also, we knew we needed a better price. And I've been talking to people in Korea. So, putting the pieces of the jigsaw together and making sure that, if it goes that way, are you able to cope? Can you manage that? And can you manage the fact to be priced? Because Korea could make it less than half the price that we could make it in the UK. And although Barter could make the shoes cheaper, it was still so much cheaper to get them in South Korea. But it's meeting the people. And I think if you meet the right people, there's a lot of nice people out there that will help. And they did. We had so much help.
And that's amazing. And you can definitely point to a lot of the people you have met, I guess, to also having been kind of also having played a big role in Reebok actually ending up where the company are today, right?
Oh, absolutely, yes. So many. And it's, I just happen to be the founder. And, well, when I say the founder, with Jeff. Unfortunately, and this is one of the saddest parts of the story, is that Jeff died just as we got our 5-star shoe, just as we got into America. And Jeff loved the factory. He loved working in the factory. That's all he wanted to do. And he ran the factory. He did all the things in the factory. And, as far as he was concerned, he said, Joe, you do the rest. You do whatever we need to do. So, and that was good, because where my father and uncle never spoke, and when they did, they were at each other's throats. Jeff and I never had a bad word. We never fell out, and I must have done some stupid things. I really must have done all that.
I'm sure about that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I must have tested my brother's patience, certainly, but I think we recognised that Jeff was good in the factory, and I was better out of factory and away from him, doing the other things.
In some sense, Joe, can you say that I mean, it's really, I want to talk a bit about also kind of the passing of Jeff just in a short bit, but just actually one question popped into my mind was, I mean, the relationship you had with Jeff while building Reebok, had it in some way been, I mean, had your uncle and dad's very hostile way of running their business together, had that been kind of a negative inspiration for you guys? So you kind of saw that and said, this is not a way to run a business, or kind of how did you actually manage to, I mean, for so long have such a good relationship while also actually building something of that significant that Reebok has been?
No, I think it's rather unusual, that, and I think maybe Jeff was more perceptive than I was on that, because we never verbalized the fact that father and uncle, we could never run a company like that. I mean, they were never together. They hardly spoke. In fact, Jeff and I had to drag them apart on more than one occasion when they were fighting. That was so bad. So, but we never did that. And whilst we didn't say, well, we shouldn't work together because look what happened with my father and uncle, our father and uncle, so how can we manage to do this? Well, we did, and we didn't. I think we got on well with each other. We didn't socialize with each other. We had our own social lives. But when it was in the factory, we just got on together, and that was it. They say Jeff left most of it to me, and I guess if I got it wrong, he probably just shrugged his shoulders and thought, well, that's, he got it wrong, but don't worry about it. He'll get it right next time. So, and I think that maybe he was more perceptive than I was on that. Because I would go off and do things, and I know I would, I'd book a trip to America, and I do know because my wife and his wife, and that did cause some problems. Why are you going to America? Jeff never bought. Jeff didn't. As far as Jeff was concerned, if I had decided I should go to America, I should go to America. But they were sort of, why do you want to do that? So, and that's the irony. The irony of Jeff dying was the fact that the only way I could run that company was to buy out his wife, because at that time we were very small, and I couldn't work with her. It was difficult. So it became my company, as it were, at that point, and I could make decisions without even asking anybody then. And that may sound bad, but I think the good thing about knowing you can make a decision, you also know you can change it. You're the one. And so for quite some time, I was able to take the business and change it, really get it to America, and then realize that it was time to hand that on now. Now, a lot more people can grow this business.
Yeah, and actually, I think it's a pretty good bridge over to the question I actually also had in mind, Joe. Probably also based a little bit on the fact that, as you also we discussed, that you lost your brother Jeff just before you actually managed to break into the American market, which had been a very big goal for you. And the way I understand, actually, most of the companies living the time simply because it was such a huge market. But I mean, one of the things that, in my perspective, is really, really important as well, is kind of, embracing the whole human, if you can say that, and I could imagine that there must have been quite a lot of stress on your part just from building the company, right? But also, Joe, I mean, you lost Jeff in a very young age. I think he was like 47, right?
Yes.
And also the fact that, I mean, you also lost your daughter as well, so you have had a lot of pressure on yourself by building a huge company and having huge ambitions. But you also had some very traumatic things happening to you personally. Do you have any reflections or advice or how to kind of cope with having so much pressure on your mentally in both personal life and in business life as well?
Well, I think that I get asked this question quite a bit, the same type of question. That is, how do you balance business and sort of family life? This is difficult because your company, especially a company that you give birth to as a way, it is your youngster, it is your child, just like any other part of your family. You are welded to it, and if there's a demand for the business, you have to do that. You just because you're away on people's birthdays, and that's what happened with me with the NSGA show. That's the National Sporting Goods in America. Was always the first and second week in February, which coincided with my son's birthday. So I was always away, but at least I could bring back something different, something from America. But you had to do the business. That's where the business, and I think that to be successful in both the family and the business is they have to come with you. They have to also belong to that same family. They have to want what you want. And this didn't work for my wife. She didn't like travel. My first wife didn't like travel. She said it made her ill, and I can believe that. Although she did do a round the world trip with me towards the end when we were doing really well, and we went to see friends in Australia. So she did. It didn't work out very well though, that trip, as you probably read in the book. So, and when you meet the person who's going to be your wife, and you're young, you've not really formed your business life at that point, as I hadn't. I worked for the family business, so this grew differently. So that the fact that we, Jeff and myself, sort of became the founders of Reebok, that was a move. I was already married when that happened, and I think it's got to be nice to if people can see what you're doing. It's not that my first wife was against it, although she did say on occasions, "Why are you doing this? Why don't you go and get a decent job?" Because we were struggling, and in those early days, it was a struggle. And then of course, Jeff died, and that changed the whole thing. I became the 100% owner of the company at that point, so I could make those decisions, and we did grow, and we had some fantastic times. And we were at Monte Carlo doing the Princess Grace tennis tournament for her memorial fund, and Jean would come along to that, and also my daughter would come along to that. But unfortunately, my daughter, she contracted leukemia, and although we tried, she eventually died with that. But Jeff's son, Robert, who still works and is working for Reebok even today, he also had an illness ago. Jeff lost his son, his first son, who was 2 years old, Liam, died of, I think it's purpura. It was a blood disease, the problem. And although his second son, Robert, who I say works for Reebok, had the same or similar problem, similar blood problem, which really caused a problem about 5 years ago, became very serious. And fortunately, he worked for Reebok. And they managed to hospitalize him, and he's got through it. And we think that they've actually cured him of this blood problem altogether. So, there are some benefits that come out of it, something good. Because if he could well have gone the same way as his younger brother Ian and been killed by this blood disease. So, there's some things that good that have come out of this, and others you can't change. Because people do say, what would you change if you could? Well, you can't. The two things, Jeff and my daughter, are the things we can't change. The rest of it, Reebok became number one. We overtook Adidas, we overtook Nike, and by the time I left, we were a $4 billion company and number one global sports company in the world. So what can you change? You wouldn't change that.
That's solid. That's a solid advice, Joe, and definitely also, I think a lot of people have a lot of issues, seeing the difference between what they can change and what they can change, and kind of not getting the right kind of order on that. So they spend too much time on things they cannot change and spend too little time on the things they can actually change, right? So I really appreciate that input. Time is flying very, very fast, way too fast when we have a good talk as we have here, Joe. One thing I actually wanted to ask you about the business before we kind of jump into the maybe lightning round I have in the end of each show is actually more related. You said it yourself. So you have had some amazing experiences with the tennis tournament, celebrities, and you had Sigourney Weaver endorsing you. I know you had Shaquille O'Neal also, which was, you had a lot of the largest stars in the world. Do you have any, what would be your reflection of your advice on actually managing to engage in partnerships or, in sort of endorsement deals such as this? Do you have any thoughts or inputs about that? As a brand, I mean.
Well, the one thing is that some people think they can do business in our business in a different way. And no, you can't. Endorsements. You need endorsements. You need influencers. And that changes. So you have to go with what is influencing today. It's a lot to do with entertainment. It's a lot to do with singers, and so wherever it is. It used to be sportsmen, just athletes. They used to be the endorsements and the influencers. There are now people who are just influencers. They just have personalities and they're influence. So you have to do it. If you want to be there, you have to be seen on the right people. And we know that you pay for that. In my day, pre what happened in America, we didn't pay. We supplied shoes to top athletes in the UK, people like David Jenkins, Ron Hill, all our top athletes. We just needed to supply them because we were part of what they were doing. We were not stood back. No, we were part of. We're in athletics. Yes, today, look around. I mean, it's. I did ask the question. I was asked the question a few weeks ago. Who would you use now for an influencer? And really, my answer should have been, don't ask me. You're the young guys. You should know what's influencing you. Time for me to sit back now and say, look, I'm a founder. I can't keep on telling everybody what to do. So the young people of today, and that's when you should be an entrepreneur. When you're young and you're not, you're not too sort of used to the idea that this will go wrong, that will go wrong, because when you're young, nothing goes wrong. Yeah, just a few problems here and there, but we can do it, and we get on. We just keep going. So that's and that is so important. Being young is a very important thing, I think, to be in business.
Yeah. Or to kind of the counter argument, I would say, if you're not young anymore, then at least have a fresh perspective on things, and actually also being able to disassociate yourself from what have happened before. If you have a lot of setbacks and failures in kind of your life, there's always a chance to kind of fresh start, right?
You have to move on, yes.
Joe, exactly. I mean, it's been really great. Before we jump into the lightning round, we have spoken a little bit around this topic. I think I actually just would really much appreciate to hear your perspective on luck, because you are very humbly describing a lot of what has happened for the Reebok journey as luck in your book, right? And I think that also kind of shows a big kind of perspective that you're actually able to also kind of acknowledge that is, a lot of people in this kind of macho culture, businesses, kind of says, I did that and I did this and I was so brilliant, I was so clever, and then I managed to do that. Whereas I know, which is also probably one of the reasons why I love British people to begin with, is also the humility, and it's kind of a humble way to approach things, that you have been extremely lucky. What have been like the concrete things in your life that has kind of led to this luck? Would you say that you have done something like very well in order to actually be able to have luck find you? If that question makes sense.
Yeah, I think the main thing is that you can be very lucky or you can be very unlucky. Depends on whether the glass is half full or the glass is half empty. It's, if you look at life, that there are opportunities out there as against life is difficult. No, opportunities are always out there. And the luck is being able to see those opportunities, because Arnold Martinez could have just ignored the fact that his wife enjoyed aerobic classes, but he didn't. And so these are the pieces of luck, that you've got the right person just sees something at the right time and works with it. And if you're around long enough, if you can stay with your business for long enough, you learn a little bit about what's going on around and what can affect you. And if you're there, quite often a business will go through being somewhere at the right time. And a lot of businesses have done very well during COVID. COVID has been horrible, but a lot of businesses have been there, and we're actually looking at one now, and that is the use of these two-way conversations, Zoom, use this squadcast. This has come along tremendously because of COVID. It's probably cut 10 years off the time before we would have been doing this. So now we can sit and talk, and this is probably one of the best examples of timing. And people have now developed these systems. So it's the same with Reebok. We were around in the 70s when running. We were a running company when running became big. But we were not the only company in the United Kingdom to make running shoes. But we were probably the one that were able to see it and take advantage of it. And again, it took me 11 years of going to America to get into America. So, we were around long enough to be there when it happened. So is that luck? Or is it just the fact that you keep going? You just keep going. You just, you can find an answer. And so there's probably some dumb, stupid grit that you need to really be able to be there when the luck comes up. And be fortunate enough to be able to see it. And so, good fortune. Yeah, I call it luck, and I think we were very lucky. And yet, as we've gone through, 2 people have died, which is not lucky at all. I mean, it's terrible. We do have to move on. But yes, how lucky was it that I sat next to John Willie Johnson? yeah. But then again, I was interested in, what's he doing here? Most people go to an auction and they put their hand up, or they won't. They won't just sit there and just not do anything. And the auctioneer just looks at you when he can't sell anything. And you just, so I was so interested in, how do you do that, John? What is this about? So I think it's being perceptive as well. I think if you've got a little bit of perception, what's going on here? Or maybe you're a little bit inquisitive, can lead you into the right places at the right time. So luck is the simple way of explaining it.
I would definitely say that just with regards to this fantastic conversation we're having here, Joe. Also, I mean, it's also pure luck that I found out that we could actually manage to meet, and that you were just coming out with Shoemaker. So I think that's a pretty good example of that. If you're looking for luck, right, then luck will find you, at least.
Indeed.
My perception of it. Well. Joe, time flies, and I could be talking about this for forever, I think. But with respect to the busy schedules, I think also we kind of have to round off. And we usually do that by having 3 to 4 relatively short questions in a kind of a lightning round. Are you up for us taking that?
Absolutely. I'll see if I can give you a short answer.
that's probably going to be another thing, right? I will let you try.
Okay.
So the first thing is, Joe, do you have any specific books that you have recommended a lot to other people, or maybe even gifted?
Not particularly books. I have gifted Pitch Invasion, which is the story of Adidas. So I've given 1 or 2 of those away. But really, for me, it's Churchill. He's my hero. And so I've read most of the books about Churchill, and a very interesting one by his, I don't suppose written by his daughter, Mary Solmes. It was the letters that he used to write to his wife. And even when we were in the same house at the same time, they would write letters to each other. Amazing.
Yeah.
and those have been published in a book, their own words, I think it's something like that. And that's a fascinating book, but Churchill is a fascinating character. And so I've read quite a bit about Churchill. I used to read a lot when I was younger, but these days I fall asleep when I'm reading.
I can say from experience that reading Shoemaker, the new book that are out just now, will not make you fall asleep. That's for sure. I have been reading it before bedtime, and I can say I tend to go a little bit too late to sleep because I couldn't stop reading the book. So
you're very kind.
We will look into Churchill, Joe. Very, very nice. The second last question I have. So if you have the opportunity or chance to send one message, like text message to the entire world, like having showcasing one message, what would that be and why?
It would be just keep going. The message is that it's tough at times, and the only way that you get through it is to just keep going.
That is a strong message as well. And I also believe actually that when you say that, a lot of people in these days specifically have an idea that things come easy. And at least I'm only 38 years old, so probably pretty young still, right? But I would still say that things rarely, the good things rarely come easy. It's probably almost always the opposite, right?
Well, I think to get the satisfaction of success, you have to work hard and you have to be pushed. If it came very easy, I don't think you would have any satisfaction because you wouldn't know how much you had pushed and how much you had made, what effort you had made. And I think you have to value your own effort. If you can value that, you can justify success. Because if success is easy, then you've not succeeded, really. You've still somewhere to go. So success comes with effort.
That's a really interesting point. Can you elaborate a bit about that? Actually, it's really interesting.
Yes. So was there a question there?
Yeah, actually, just if you can elaborate a bit more about that, or maybe put it into your own perspective, like in your own life with Reebok and building Reebok, like how much of that journey has been enjoyed by kind of the struggle that you kind of faced, and how much has been driven by
I think I've always enjoyed the struggle. I think that I valued the struggle probably more than it's like, people will say to travel is better than arriving. It's the journey. The whole journey is better than when, you say, well, I've finished now and okay. No, that journey has been so exciting. Okay, there are some tough times on the journey. There are some and hopefully tough times because, it's like climbing a mountain. To succeed in climbing a mountain, you've got to go through a lot. And if it's easy, it's not a mountain. It's just a walk. So it's got to be. There's got to be challenges out there, and I think if you can rise to your challenges, and then value your successes, and this is where the luck comes in. We had a lot of challenges. We had a big mountain, but we got to the top, and from the top, it's a great view, but. You're thinking, well, just a minute, where's the next challenge? So it was better to sit back and wait for a while, have a rest, and then write a book. And now you see, I have a challenge now. The challenge now is to get the book number one. We wanted to be a bestseller. So it's not just say we've written the book and that's it. No, we're talking to a lot of people. Right, we're talking to a filmmaker, I think it's later this week, who wants to get us on Netflix and things. So, these are nice challenges. Well, let's see. So we want to be number one in the book. So challenges are never ending. It's throughout life, you've just got to pick up what's next. And, Julie and I, we travel a lot. And we love it, and there's in many occasions it's a challenge, but it's good. And I think if you've not got a challenge that even at my age, I don't want too many challenges, but certainly not physical challenges these days. Certainly,
I guess it depends on what kind of challenges, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Oh, it's going to be, yes. But yes, I think you should always challenge yourself, and I don't think it should be easy. I think it's if you're only doing easy challenges, you're not really challenging yourself at all. So you've got to push it.
Yeah, exactly. And we've been pushing it throughout this talk, Joe. It's been really, really great. Actually, the last question I have, and this is a little bit funny because I know I know how you like these kind of questions, but it's like a fixed segment of the podcast, so I need to ask you still, right? And then you can elaborate why you don't hate answering these kind of questions. But what is the best advice you have ever been given, whether that be professional, personal, doesn't really matter?
The best advice. The tough thing is that you don't think it's advice at the time. In many, many ways, the best is not advice, because a lot of advice really is history. And, I think the best advice that I can ever remember is to just look to the future. Because, looking back is history. And if somebody else did that, and it's going to be different when you come to it. a lot of advice is sometimes misleading, sometimes discouraging. And that's why when somebody said, if you want to be an entrepreneur, well, it's best being young and don't listen to too many people. If you have an idea, go for it. Just get up and try it, because it doesn't matter if you fail. It's just a lesson in your journey, because you can get up when you're young. You can get up. When Jeff and I, 25, 23, leaving the family business, what could go wrong? What could go wrong?
Yeah.
No.
And it didn't. And history kind of shows that it didn't went too bad, as they might say, right?
Yeah, right. Went okay.
To put it that went pretty okay.
Yeah.
Joe, it's been amazing having you on the show. I can only highly encourage our listeners today to get Shoemaker, Help It Be Number One. It's a fantastic book. I really enjoyed reading it, and I read a lot. So that doesn't come lightly, at least from me. So I can definitely recommend that. It's available on all platforms, Kindle, Amazon, and such. If our audience thinks this conversation has been as fantastic as I have thought it to be, where can they kind of follow you, Joe? Social media, web, other places?
Yeah, we're on Instagram, all social media, and Julie's good at that. She keeps things in touch. But we're on social media. So any of it, all the platforms, Facebook. Yes, we're there. But
amazing. So we are connected on LinkedIn, and that's a good place to start. But besides that, there are plenty of ways to reach out and thank Joe for an awesome podcast. I think, Joe, I will let that kind of be the words from a very, very good conversation. I really enjoyed your company, and I really enjoyed your good and very, very valuable answers. Thank you so much for taking your time doing this podcast.
It's been a pleasure, Bjorn. It really has. And yes, and good luck with your podcasting and your life. You're still young yet. Plenty of places to go yet. Plenty of tough things to get through. But it's been a pleasure.
Du har lyttet til Rollemodellerne. Podcasten er produceret af mig, Bjørn Vestergaard Barfod. Klip og redigering, Anders Guldberg. Jeg er tilbage med en ny inspirerende gæst næste gang, så du kan starte med den bedste inspiration.